It has been 7 long years since the heartbreak of the Orioles' last postseason appearance. And there's been a lot of bad baseball in that time frame as well. But in 2023, the Baltimore Orioles are headed back to the postseason. I'll tell you how they did it coming back this weekend against the Rays, coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
There, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, September 18th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the final 3 games of the Orioles series against the Tampa Bay Rays, in which the O's won the final 2 games to split the 4 games, got themselves the tiebreaker, kept themselves in first place, and maybe most importantly, clinched their first playoff berth since 2016. I'll recap the incredible win on Saturday with Grayson Rodriguez's outstanding outing and Gunnar Henderson taking over the game. I'll recap the wild victory on Sunday with the walk-off in the 11th and the Orioles clinching the playoff berth, and then talk about what's next for the O's, because it's amazing that they've gotten into the postseason, but they still have their eyes set on the division. What do the O's need to do in the final 13 games to make that happen? Talk about all that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you could win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So we're talking Orioles and Rays, and a happy clinchmas to everyone involved as the O's. Now, the win didn't technically on Sunday clinch them the playoff spot. It happened about 30 minutes earlier when the Guardians defeated the Rangers to clinch a playoff spot for both the Orioles and the Rays. But it was so nice to get the walk-off win to celebrate it anyway on Sunday. So let's talk about the weekend that was. Of course, on Friday, I recapped the Orioles' 4-3 loss on Thursday night in Game 1 of this huge 4-game set. Well, the Orioles then lost again, 7-1 on Friday night after honoring Adam Jones. He retires as an Oriole. It's a sold-out crowd, and the Orioles basically come up with nothing except for, shout out to Heston Kjerstad, who got his first big league hit. Happened to be a home run for the Orioles' only run in that game. So shout out to Heston. Otherwise, nothing going Friday. Backs absolutely against the wall Saturday. The O's win 8-0. And then somehow, some way, they win it 5-4 on Sunday in 11 innings. And the Orioles end up splitting the crucial 4-game series with the Rays. So with the 2 wins, the Orioles are 93-56. They are 2 games clear of the Tampa Bay Rays in the AL East. And because they won at least 1 game this weekend, they clinched the tiebreaker over the Rays and ended up winning the season series 8-5, which means if the 2 teams end up tied at the end of the year, the Orioles will get the division title because there is no longer any tie-breaking game 163. So essentially a 2-game lead is really a 3-game lead at this point for the Orioles. And of course, they also clinched at least a wild card playoff berth. But let's start with Saturday. The 8-0 win for the Orioles. Get you the 5 things you need to know from that one. And listen, before we even get into it, the Orioles' backs were absolutely against the wall. They had dropped the first 2 of this crucial series. The Rays had tied the division up, and the Orioles were in the middle of a 4-game losing streak in which they had done essentially nothing. They had scored 6 runs in those 4 games, lost all 4 at home, 2 to the Cardinals, 2 to the Rays. I was down. People were down. It was not looking good for the O's. And one more loss, and the Rays were going to jump into first place. All the pressure was going to be on Sunday. And it was looking like the Orioles were going to just go flat in the biggest series of most of these guys' lives. And then Grayson Rodriguez took the hill. And the first thing you need to know from Saturday's win is that Grayson Rodriguez showed why the Orioles took him in the first round in 2018. And he showed that he can be an ace for this team, not just in May or June, but in September and in October potentially when it matters for the Orioles. In the 8-0 win on Saturday, Grayson Rodriguez goes a career-high 8 innings of work, kept the Rays scoreless on just 5 hits, 7 strikeouts, and no walks for Grayson. And it only took him 95 pitches. Like, I got to say, if it were different circumstances, maybe earlier in the year, maybe they weren't monitoring his innings as much, I think that they might have sent Grayson back out there. But an 8-0 game, you're trying to, pull him back a little bit, make sure he's good for the postseason. They went to the bullpen, but at only 95 pitches, he could have gone back out there. He's thrown more than 95 in a couple of starts this year. 8 hard hit balls against him in 8 innings. Not too bad a number at all for Rodriguez. And listen, it wasn't the crazy swing and miss stuff. Like, it was only 11 whiffs on 55 swings. The 20% is not great. 36 swings on his fastball, just 6 swings and misses. It wasn't like he had the dominant stuff, but he just went up there pumping essentially 97 to 99, topping out at 100 with the fastball, and just threw fastballs and got outs against one of the best lineups in baseball. Of 95 pitches, Grayson threw 66 four-seam fastballs on Saturday night. That is by far the highest percentage of fastballs in any of his big league starts. And the pitch was great. And again, 6 whiffs on 36 swings isn't anything crazy. But when you added 14 called strikes, 17 foul balls on those fastballs, and the fact that the fastball was in the zone 73% of the time when he threw it, that's a great pitch for him in that night. And yeah, he threw a couple of really good curveballs and a couple of changeups, and he tossed in a couple sliders. But otherwise, it was just dominating the Rays with fastballs. And just the confidence he had on the mound, the gusto out there, you could see it in the 1-2-3 inning with 2 strikeouts. He was locked in. He got into one little jam in the 4th inning after a leadoff double. He had first and third with 1 out, got Josh Lowe to roll into a huge 4-6-3 double play. And then after the 4th, it was really smooth sailing for Grayson. I mean, it was a 1-2-3 8th. In his final inning, ends it with a strikeout, screams into his glove. That was an awesome moment for Grayson, for the Orioles. Listen, I know I've been hammering Kyle Bradish game 1, Grayson game 2 for a while. This does make you think, do you go Grayson game 1 of a playoff series? I would still send Bradish out there for game 1 and Grayson for game 2, but the two are neck and neck on trying to be the Orioles ace right now. And listen, that is a fantastic problem for the Orioles to have. Second thing you need to know from the 8-0 win on Saturday night is that Gunnar Henderson, speaking of young kids, speaking of rookies, Gunnar Henderson also rose to the moment in this game. And he had been red hot coming in anyway, so it wasn't a super big surprise that he was, swinging the bat well in Saturday's game, but he just took it to another level. Gunnar, who was moved back into the leadoff spot for the Orioles, Brandon Hyde citing that he didn't want Adley to have to rush so much, after the top of the 1st inning catching, than trying to get to the plate to lead off the game. So Adley was back into the 2-hole, and Adley actually started hitting very well again in the last couple of games in the series. Gunnar goes back to the leadoff spot. He goes 3 for 5 with a homer, 3 RBIs, and 2 runs scored in the game on Saturday. Had a big RBI single later in the game, but of course we know what the big swing was. The 2-run homer off of Tyler Glasnow in the 2nd inning that made it a 4-0 Orioles lead at the time. He was just sitting on a slider, and he got a hanging slider and did not miss it. 27th home run of the year, went 105 off the bat, 428 feet for a 2-run shot for Gunnar Henderson. Remember, he led off the game Saturday night. First pitch fastball, lines it into center for a base hit. Then first pitch slider in his second at-bat, hits a 2-run bomb of a home run. He was just locked in, rising to the moment. He's been incredible. He's the shoe-in. I mean, he is the absolute shoe-in for Rookie of the Year. And he's turning into a season where he's going to get some MVP votes now at an 833 OPS on the season now for Gunnar Henderson. Just phenomenal what he's been doing. Third thing you need to know from the 8-0 win on Saturday for the O's is that, when you get into a slump, right, especially an offensive skid where it's a losing streak, of 4 games, and the big reason for the losing streak, I think we can all agree, was the offense. The O's offense, again, 6 runs in 4 games, wasn't doing anything. I've talked about this before, there's a couple of ways to get out of a stretch like that. One is just your offense kind of breaks out. You run into a couple, hit a couple of big homers. That's generally the hardest way to do it because you don't just flip the switch like that sometimes. The second way is you just have a pitcher absolutely shove and put up a 0. Now, that happened Saturday, right? You get 8 scoreless innings from your starter. But the Orioles offense also exploded. It's not like they got the 1-0 win, they got their mojo back, and then they started hitting. Sometimes you need a weird break to go your way. Sometimes a mistake by the defense. And that's what felt like it happened on Saturday. Ryan O'Hearn, who drove in the first run of the game in the bottom of the first inning against Tyler Glasnow, it kind of felt like Randy Arozarena, who came in on that flare into left field, and it just dropped it, right? I mean, he did go into a dive, but that was right in his glove. It's a ball you got to catch. O'Hearn was credited with an RBI single, and it probably would have been a sac fly anyway to give the Orioles a 1-0 lead. But that little break seemed to push them. And yes, Austin Hayes, the next batter, did ground into a double play, and they only got the 1 run out of it. But then they kept getting other little breaks, like in the second inning, after a Ramon Urias 2-out single, a wild pitch, he goes to second. Then Adam Frazier singles him home. Then Gunnar hits the homer. All of a sudden, it's 4-0. And you just get these little tiny breaks that can sometimes go your way. And I think it was just Randy dropping that ball, getting the crowd into it, getting the run across, getting the base runners on, that got Glasnow into a little funk, got the Orioles going a bit, and they just kind of exploded from there. They get themselves 8 runs in one game after they had 6 runs in the previous 4. They pick up 11 hits in the game. They also drew 3 walks. They got themselves on base, and they delivered with runners in scoring position as well, which they certainly hadn't been doing. Maybe it was just that little break to help them out. Fourth thing you need to know from the win on Saturday is that, it wasn't just the guys like Gunnar Henderson, and I mentioned Ryan O'Hearn, and even mentioned Adley Rutschman, who kind of got out of his funk. It was really the bottom of the order as well who did some big-time damage for the Orioles. Hitters 6 through 9 on Saturday were Aaron Hicks, Cedric Mullins, Ramon Urias, and Adam Frazier. Those 4 hitters combined to have 6 hits for the Orioles and drive in 3 runs, and they were huge in this game. Aaron Hicks, a big 2 for 3 with a walk day, reaching 3 times, played a really good right field. Cedric Mullins had a big RBI single in the game. Ramon Urias had a couple of hits, including an RBI single, and he started that 3-run rally in the second with a 2-out single. Adam Frazier had the big RBI single in the second, also got himself on base with a walk and scored 2 runs. This Orioles order just continues to be so deep, right? There's not a super easy out in the order when it looks like that, and they don't allow you to let up. And once again, they got to Tyler Glasnow. Glasnow has not been good against the Orioles this year. At the Trop earlier this season, he gave up 6 runs in 4 1/3 against Baltimore. This time, 4 innings, 6 runs, 8 hits, 4 Ks, 2 walks, and a homer. He's one of the best pitchers in the American League, and the Orioles just kind of have his number this season, and that is huge because they could see Glasnow. I mean, it seems like a pretty solid chance they're going to see Glasnow in the postseason as well. Nice to know that they've got a little one up on him at this point. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles win on Saturday is that it was cool to see Mike Baumann finish out that game. Baumann, who was actually recalled on Saturday to join the Orioles bullpen. Brian Baker initially came up. We talked about it on Friday's episode, all those crazy roster moves the Orioles made. And while Brian Baker did come into the game in the 6th inning Friday with the O's down 4-0, and on the first pitch gave up a 3-run homer that basically put the game away to Harold Ramirez, he then bared down and threw 3 more scoreless innings in relief and basically saved the Orioles bullpen. And that was huge for the O's. Now, because he had thrown 3 innings and he had options, Baker went down on Saturday, and Mike Baumann returned for the first time in about a month after he had struggled recently and went down to AAA. And it was nice to see Baumann. After 8 scoreless from Grayson, Baumann comes out there, pitches a scoreless 9th, gets a strikeout to end the game. He could be, a bigger part of this bullpen once again here. But Baker was huge. Shout out to him. That was the reason the Orioles could use all those relievers they did Sunday in the 11-inning win. And just the moment. I was in the ballpark. Maybe it's not me that's the problem. Now 8-8. I was in the ballpark Saturday. Just when Baumann gets that strikeout and that place exploding, knowing, all right, the losing streak is over. We're back to the O's we've known throughout 2023, and it's time to go get this division. That felt like a real turning point in what was, I feel, with the pitching, with the hitting, maybe the most complete win of the season on Saturday as the O's took Game 3 from the Rays. But the Orioles still weren't done, right? Like the game Saturday was great because you secured the tiebreaker. You just needed one win to do that. And you got yourself back into first place all alone. But you still didn't really want to lose that series, right? If you lose the Sunday game, it's great that you got the tiebreaker, but you're also even in the division. Not a great spot for you. Sunday game was the swing game. And somehow, some way, I still don't know how they did it, the Orioles pulled off a victory on Sunday. And coming up next, I'll tell you how in the world they won it in 11 innings. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Jase Medical. Now, we get a lot of questions. What is Jase Medical and what can the products be used for? Well, what Jase Medical does is interesting. They really are a simple company. You go online, you fill out a form, and then you can get prescription life-saving medications sent right to your door. They've got a product, they call it the Jase case. It gives you peace of mind. So you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. They make sure you have it. And you can save a lot of money with Jase case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Promo code Locked On. So the Orioles, what a weekend it was. What a weekend it was. Didn't start out well, but the recovery was fantastic. As I talked about, they win it 8-0 in the Saturday game, but the Sunday game was still huge. And yes, they already had the tiebreaker with the win on Saturday, but you just felt like they needed that Sunday game. Get that division lead back up to 2 games. And somehow they did it, winning it 5-4 in 11 innings to end up splitting the 4-game series. And I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from Sunday's victory. The first thing you need to know is Cedric Mullins ended up playing hero in the 11th inning. The walk-off sac fly ended up being the winner, scoring Adley Rutschman and giving the O's the 5-4 victory. And Cedric Mullins, he hasn't been swinging the hottest of bats lately. It's been a little bit of a struggle, really, since he came off the injured list for the second time. I mean, he was 0 for 4 in Sunday's game, and he did drive in that run, which was great. But, you look at Mullins just over this weekend, the final 3 games of the series, and, a 2 for 11. It's not like he's knocking the cover off the ball at this point. But the cooler moment was the fact that, yes, the Orioles had technically clinched the playoffs about 20, 30 minutes before they won the game because the Guardians had beaten the Rangers 9-1. The Orioles' magic number was 1. They needed a Rangers loss. They got it there in the playoffs. But to win the game and be able to celebrate was much, much better. And having Cedric Mullins do it was something special. Because, yes, it would be amazing if Adley or Gunnar or Heston Kjerstad or Jordan Westberg walks it off. But there's something special about it being Cedric Mullins. One of the guys who has been through a lot of this, right? Cedric Mullins, who came up in 2018. He was teammates with Adam Jones. He shared the outfield with Adam Jones down the stretch that season, who went through 2019 and was sent all the way down to Double-A Bowie after being the Orioles starting center fielder on opening day. Coming here in 2020 for part of the season, not being able to do much, then finally just ditching switch hitting and having the 30-30 season in 2021. Then taking a step back last year, but still helping the Orioles get close to the playoffs and have a winning record. And finally now, yeah, he's dealt with some injuries, but to be a leader on this team and the center fielder and help this team get back to the postseason with that swing, that was just incredible for Cedric Mullins. There were some amazing scenes from the clubhouse after the Orioles clinched the playoffs Sunday. One of the cool ones that was reported was that Austin Hayes, Anthony Santander, and Cedric Mullins basically came in for a group hug and yelled, "We did it." And that's a special moment for them because those are really the 3 guys who have survived this rebuild, right? There's a couple others, but those are truly the guys who were on this team 2018 and before and have made it to this point, like went through all of the dark days. Were on the big league team when Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter were still here. And now they've made it to the other side. What a cool moment for Cedric and those guys, and to have him be the one who essentially sent the Orioles to the playoffs. Second thing you need to know from Sunday's win, extra innings were just that. They were absolutely extra. What happened in those final couple of extra innings? I mean, unbelievable stuff. You get to the 10th inning, and we'll talk about how the O's got to the 10th, but you get to the 10th, right? And you've got yourself a 3-3 score line. Yennier Cano, who had gotten the final out of the top of the ninth to keep it a 3-2 game, goes back out there in the 10th. And it's literally just back-to-back Baltimore chops that score the zombie runner from second. It's like, what can you even do here? It's the second time this has happened to Yennier Cano this season. Tristan Gray comes out there, hits a ball into the ground that had a launch angle. Get ready for this one. Had a launch angle of negative 87 degrees. The ball was hit so directly into the ground off the bat of Tristan Gray to lead off the 10th that it could not register an exit velocity via the TrackMan cameras and everything that tracks the baseball game. That's how directly he hit it into the ground. It bounced straight up in the air and came back down to Adley Rutschman at home plate before he threw him out at first, but it got the runner to third. Then Harold Ramirez on the very next pitch chops one directly into the ground, a negative 75-degree launch angle. It hangs up in the air so long that the runner from third is able to score. Now Cano fields it and throws out Ramirez at first for the second out, but it's like they didn't hit a ball further than 60 feet and they take the lead. It was kind of frustrating, but the O's weren't done. You go to the bottom of the 10th and you got the pitcher spot up because the Orioles had pinch hit for James McCann earlier in the game. And so now you've got the pitcher ready to hit. Of course, it's not going to be Yennier Cano. So Jordan Westburg goes out there and he fouls one off. Then he tries to bunt, fouls it off. Then he tries to swing again and strikes out. Then Gunnar Henderson pops out and you're like, it's done. They're going to lose this game. And somehow Adley Rutschman just fights a single up the middle, like did not hit it hard. 76.4 miles per hour was the exit velocity for Rutschman, but he just sneaks it up the middle for a base hit, scoring Aaron Hicks, the zombie runner. All of a sudden, we are tied at 4. And here we go again. And back out for the 11th, who is it? But DL Hall, who had a save chance in Anaheim, couldn't get it done, pitched against this Rays team on Friday, did not get an out before he left the game. So you're feeling not great with DL Hall against 2, 3, and 4 in the Rays order. But you know what he does with the runner on second and nobody out? Brandon Lau pop out, Randy Arozarena ground out, Josh Lowe ground out, and the inning is over without a run. I mean, what a moment for DL Hall. But then maybe the craziest thing of all may have happened. So the Rays go to the lefty Jake Diekman in the bottom of the 11th of a 4-4 game with the lefty Ryan O'Hearn due up. Got Adley Rutschman on second as the zombie runner. And Ryan O'Hearn on the first pitch squares to bunt, gets down a beautiful sack bunt, and moves Rutschman to third with one out. They asked O'Hearn after the game. He said he probably hadn't laid down a sack bunt in over 5 years. He hates doing it, as he should. He's a power hitter. But Brandon Hyde asked him if he could bunt before the inning, and he said, yeah, sure, against a tough lefty, and he got one down. And it set it up for Cedric Mullins, another lefty, to come through with the sac fly to win the game. Just the events that had to unfold for the Orioles to win this game. Remember, they had to get 2 runs off Pete Fairbanks, who, with Felix Bautista injured, I think is the most dominant closer that's healthy in baseball right now. They had to not only score against Fairbanks in the 9th, but they had to get that Rutschman hit off him in the 10th, and they somehow did it. Incredible scenes. Incredible scenes. The O's have had some crazy extra inning wins this year. This one might take the cake. Third thing you need to know from that win Sunday is that, yeah, let's get into what happened at the end of the game because morale was low. I'll talk about the bullpen in a bit, but Jorge Lopez in a 1-1 game gives up back-to-back home runs with one out in the 8th inning. And all of a sudden, after the rookie, Tristan Gray, for his second big league hit, takes him deep, and then the 9-hitter, Christian Bethancourt, takes him deep, it is 3-1 Rays. Going into the bottom of the 8th, this Rays bullpen has been unbelievable. 1 earned run in its past 39 innings, I think, to that point. Thinking, how are the O's going to get 2? And then it gets worse when you see, oh, you know, we won't have to see Pete Fairbanks till the 9th. No. Here comes Fairbanks in the 8th inning. And what does Adley Rutschman do? Well, Adley gets him. Adley gets him with 2 outs, drives a homer, makes it 3-2. Fairbanks also made him throw 21 pitches in the 8th. So when he came back out in the 9th, he was a little bit tired. And he gets the first two batters, and then Austin Hayes singles. And Jorge Mateo gets the first. And up comes Adam Frazier. And I don't believe much in players being clutch. Sometimes it's more just lucky what you do in those situations. But if there's clutch, Adam Frazier had it. Down to his final strike, Mateo on first, and Frazier just slaps it the other way, on the ground, down the third base line, into the corner, and you knew. As soon as Randy Arozarena wasn't playing over there, Jorge Mateo's easily scoring from first. He did just that to tie the game. Just incredible late comeback offense by the Orioles, right? They've done it all year long with all the comeback victories. And just to give up those two homers were so deflating, right? They were incredibly deflating in the top of the eighth inning. To come back and tie that game against Pete Fairbanks, that dude is nasty, was just unbelievable. I can't believe still that the Orioles won that game. Fourth thing you need to know from the Sunday victory, Dean Kremer. Now, he didn't pitch super deep into this game, but he was just what the doctor ordered for the Orioles. 5 innings of one-run baseball for Dean in the Sunday win. He gave up a solo homer in the first inning to Brandon Lau, and then just didn't allow much after that. 5 innings, 1 run on 2 hits, 5 Ks, 2 walks, and that homer on 86 pitches for Kremer. And listen, we always knew the leash was going to be short. After Grayson Rodriguez went 8 on Saturday, they only had to use Mike Baumann for 1 inning. Essentially, every single reliever was available in the Sunday game. You knew as soon as Brandon Hyde had a chance to go to the bullpen, he was going to. But when Kremer was out there, he did his job. 12 whiffs on 46 swings. What I was most impressed with Dean Kremer was what he did with his changeup in this game. Dean Kremer only threw 6 changeups, all right, out of the 86 pitches that he threw. And it's not his most used pitch. It's a pitch he likes to use against lefties from time to time. But he broke it out exactly when he needed it. That was what was so impressive by Dean Kremer, because he basically didn't throw a changeup for the first 4 innings. Then he comes out in the 5th inning. The lefty Jonathan Aranda's leading off the inning, and he just torments him with changeup and strikes him out. Then the lefty Tristan Gray hits later in the inning. Ended up giving up a single to him, but earlier in the at-bat just tormented him with changeups. And to have that weapon in your back pocket to go to it, I loved it from Dean Kremer. And even better, listen, Kramer's first 2 starts after a glorious August. His first 2 starts in September were not good at all. It was concerning, his last 2 starts. But to see him go 5 strong with the 1 run, he started the 6th inning, walked the leadoff batter, Yandy Diaz, and then was pulled. So it was 5+ for Dean Kremer. Brandon Hyde gave him a very short leash in the 6th inning. But I think it was the right move. It was just what the O's needed from Kremer. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the extra innings win on Sunday is that Hyde went to that bullpen early, right? And it mostly paid off. I mentioned in the 6th inning, he gave Kremer 1 batter to face the righty. He walked him, and he goes to Danny Coulombe early in the 6th inning of a 1-1 game in the regular season, because Brandon Hyde knows playing the Rays, that's the most important game left of your regular season, because you can swing 2 games in the standings with this one right here. You had a fully rested bullpen. He goes to Coulombe. Danny Coulombe, just spectacular, as he's been all season for the O's, an inning and a third scoreless. Then he goes to Jorge Lopez, who did finish out the 7th well, came out, got a big out in the 8th. And here was the weird thing about Jorge, right? His stuff probably looked as good as it has since he rejoined the Orioles a couple of weeks ago. Like, the stuff was looking nasty for Jorge Lopez in the 7th. He came back out there in the 8th, got another out. And I was thinking, okay, they're going to let him kind of go to the end of the lineup. Then if it gets back to the top, they will pull Jorge Lopez. And he got ahead of Tristan Gray 1 and 2. The stuff was looking good. And then a fastball just caught too much of the plate, gives up a homer. Next batter, you could argue, probably shouldn't have been in there for that second batter. Gives up a homer. And all of a sudden, in 3 pitches, Jorge Lopez went from looking dominant to giving up back-to-back homers and giving up the lead. But the bullpen stayed the course. And although, it wasn't what they needed from Lopez in that second inning of work, they stayed the course and got the job done. Went to Cionel Perez. Gets a huge ground out to finish out the 8th inning. Goes to Fuji. Didn't have his best stuff, 2/3 of an inning, but they got a huge out at the plate. Cano gets the final out of the 9th. Then after they tie it, DL Hall, incredible in the 11th after Cano puts up a nice 10th inning, and the Orioles win the game. And I just loved it from Brandon Hyde, because maybe every single button he pushed didn't work, but he knew how important that game was Sunday. and he managed it like a postseason game, and it was a good window in what the O's are going to do. Now, if you're all mad, he left in Jorge Lopez too long. Jorge Lopez isn't going to be eligible for the postseason roster anyway, so that's not indicative of how he'll use Lopez in the postseason, because he literally won't be able to use him like that, because he won't be able to use him at all in the postseason. But they managed that game like they needed to do. They had the bullpen to do it, and they came out with one of the biggest wins of the season. So the O's get the final 2 games. They split the series. They've got a 2-game lead. But what is next for the Orioles? What do they need to do in the final 13 games to hold on to the division lead and make sure they can pop the champagne one more time in the regular season? We'll discuss that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Sleeper. The MLB playoffs are around the corner, and the Orioles officially now are going to be competing. And that means the clock is ticking on your chance to times your money by 100 in cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball's never been more exciting than it is now, with studs like Acuna, Betts, Ohtani, Gunnar Henderson. So you just go and pick more or less on stats for these stars like homers, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to a 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. And Sleeper, they've got an app that's super easy to use. You go in, you make the picks. It's very easy. It's very quick. The entries can be made in under a minute, and then you try to win 100 times your money. So use the promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Check out Sleeper today. So after things weren't looking good there for a second, with the Orioles' backs up against the wall, they came through. 8-0 win Saturday. Incredible 5-4 walk-off win in 11 innings Sunday. And the O's split the series with the Rays. So the question is, what is next? Well, the Orioles' lead is now 2 games over the Rays, as I mentioned. And because they clinched the season series against the Rays this weekend, don't play them again, they have clinched the tiebreaker. There are no longer tiebreaker games, no longer game 163s in baseball. Comes down to head-to-head record if 2 teams are tied in the standings at the end of the year, which means if the O's and Rays finish with the same record, the Orioles will win the division. So that basically means that the 2-game lead they have now, Orioles at 93 and 56, Rays at 92 and 59. The 2-game lead is really a 3-game lead because the Rays have to finish with a better record than the Orioles to actually win the division. So the Orioles' magic number is down to 10. The addition of Orioles wins and Rays losses for the rest of the season, once it equals 10, that's when the Orioles will clinch the AL East. So what does it look like moving forward? Let's start with the Orioles. They've got 13 games remaining and only 1 off day. Next Monday is the only off day remaining for the O's. Now, there's a little, I think, upper hand for the Rays here because the Rays only have 11 games remaining. They've got 3 more off days. That's kind of wild, but the Rays have 3 more off days this season. That's kind of a tough break for the Orioles, for the Rays to have 2 more off days, but we'll see how it plays out. So for the Orioles, first up, you could argue it gets tougher than the Rays. Probably not, but maybe a little bit. They're going to Houston. Starting tonight, a 3-game series against the defending World Series champions, an Astros team that came in and took 2 of 3 from the Orioles at Camden Yards earlier this season. Really good chance, really, in that series for the O's to win 2 of 3, but Felix Bautista had his one really bad outing, gave up the go-ahead grand slam to Kyle Tucker in the 9th of Game 1. But the Houston Astros, right now, they're trying to just hold on to first place in their own division. It'll be an interesting series. Astros have a 1.5 lead on the Rangers. Orioles have a 2-game lead over the Rays. Both teams kind of in a similar spot. But Game 1 is tonight, 8:10 p.m. Eastern Time start. John Means, after 5 innings of 3-run ball in his first start back from Tommy John against the Cardinals last week, will take on an Astros order. Welcome back, John Means. And he'll go up against the future Hall of Famer Justin Verlander, who's going to take the hill for the Astros at age 40. He's got a 3.39 ERA on the season and 143 and a third innings between the Mets and the Astros. Although Verlander kind of got hit around by the Athletics his last time out. 7 innings, but 5 runs on 8 hits in that one for Verlander. And you can listen to every single pitch of the Orioles' hometown radio broadcast of tonight's Game 1 between the O's and the Stros on the SXM app through SiriusXM. Just download the app and search Orioles. But after that, the O's will have 2 more games in Houston, night game Tuesday, and then a day game on Wednesday. Then they'll continue on the road, 4 games in Cleveland. Now, Cleveland Guardians haven't been a great team this year. I mean, they're 72 and 78. And as we speak right now, they are 7 games back of the Twins in the AL Central. So even by the time that series starts, most likely the Guardians will still be technically alive in the Central, but they're basically done. Like, the Twins are going to wrap up that division this week. The hope is that the Twins do it early and maybe get it wrapped up either before the O's series or at least early in that 4-game O's series between the O's and the Guardians. So Cleveland really has nothing to play for, but they'll do 4 in Cleveland. Cleveland took 2 of 3 from the O's in Baltimore back in late May. Then they'll come back home, off day Monday, 2 at home against the Nationals, who they swept in D.C. earlier this year, and then 4 at home against the Red Sox. We know those games will be crazy. O's are 5-4 against the Sox this year. Red Sox will probably be out of it by then for the final 4 games of the season. Right now, I mean, Boston is 74 and 76. They're now 8.5 games out of the wild card. They've kind of slumped lately. They'll probably be out of it by the time that series happens. So that's the 13 games for the Orioles. The 11 games for the Rays look like this. Now, while the Orioles have their toughest series remaining coming up this week, the Rays next up is their easiest series remaining. They will be at home for 3 games against the Angels, who have tanked so badly that the Angels were officially eliminated from playoff contention this weekend and are now 68 and 82, have actually also secured another losing record here in 2023. Mike Trout not coming back. Shohei Ohtani announced he's done for the season. This is a shell of the former Los Angeles Angels. We basically just sit here and say, please, Angels, if you can take 1 out of 3, that's all we ask. Just please take 1 if you can. But then it gets a little harder for the Rays. They then host the Toronto Blue Jays for 3 games. Toronto right now is right in the thick of the wild card race. They have the 2nd wild card right now, but they're only a half game up on Texas and a game and a half up on Seattle, trying to hold on to that spot. So they'll get 3 against Toronto. Then they'll go 2 in Boston. Yeah, the Red Sox will probably be out by then, but we know how crazy it can be to play at Fenway, and crazy things happen. And then the Rays will finish with 3 games in Toronto at the end of the year. Toronto most likely will not have anything locked up and will be playing for their playoff lives that last weekend. They're going to throw everything at the Rays to try to win those games. I would still say the O's have the easier schedule left in terms of teams they play, but advantage Rays because they only have 11 games left and they get 2 more off days. So basically we look at it, Orioles 2 games up. What do the O's have to do? If you do look at it this way, let's say the O's go 1-2 in Houston. Maybe they take 3 of 4 in Cleveland, win both versus Washington, and then crazy stuff always happens against the Red Sox. So maybe they split the 4 games, 2-2 against the Red Sox. That's an 8-5 record in the Orioles' final 13 games. That's pretty in line with what they've done most of the year. 8-5 record. They don't get swept. They win 2 of the series, they split 1, and they lose 1. So it seems pretty practical, right? Like, not going out over my skis. Pretty solid prediction, I think, for the O's to go 8-5. If the Orioles do that and go 8-5 down the stretch, the Tampa Bay Rays would have to go 10-1 in their final 11 games to win the division in that scenario. Think about that. If the O's just go 8-5, have a solid 2 weeks, the Rays have to go 10-1. Now, of course, if the Orioles go 10-3, they win the division no matter what the Rays do. If the O's go 9-4, the Rays have to win all 11 games. And even at this point, like, if the O's go 7-6, the Rays have to go 9-2. Heck, if the Orioles have a losing record, right? Maybe they lose all of these series or tie them, but don't get swept in any of them because we know they don't get swept. Even if they go 6-7, the Rays would still have to go 8-3 in their final 11 games to win the division. The O's have built a little bit of a cushion here. So just win your games, win your series. You're shooting for those 8 wins in the final 13. That should be enough. And hey, little extra cherry on top, Felix Bautista continuing to throw and actually threw a bullpen off the mound for the first time since the injury on Sunday. But we'll talk about that a little bit more on tomorrow's episode. And of course, also recap game 1 between the Orioles and the Astros and game 1 between the Rays and the Angels. We're keeping close tabs on the Rays. But hey, the Orioles are in the postseason. I know they're still fighting for the division. That's what we all want. We want that AL East to get that bye, to avoid the wild card round, go straight to the ALDS. That's what we want. but the Orioles celebrated and it was awesome to watch. Everything. Check out social media. Look at all the videos from the clubhouse celebration on Sunday. Make sure to soak it in, right? Like, I know we're playing for more. We're looking for a division title. We're looking for a World Series, but the O's haven't been able to rain champagne since 2016. It's been 7 years. Enjoy it. The Orioles are going back to the postseason. The postseason for the Baltimore Orioles. They lost 110 games 2 years ago. Now they got the best record in the American League, and they're going to the playoffs. Playoff baseball is coming to Baltimore. Enjoy it. Let's hope the next step is a division title. And let's hope game 1 tonight between the Astros and the O's is another step in that direction. And I'll be back tomorrow to recap it all. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb. This has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your postseason bound team every day.